Well, it's been about 3 weeks since I used this machine for the first time. I had kind of a makeshift water drip thing set up, and that caused the blade to pop off, and it got tangled up in the wheel and got bent, and I couldn't use it anymore. So I covered it up with a tarp and left it while I ordered a new blade. And in the meantime, we had rain, we even had snow. But when I took the tarp off again this morning, everything still looked good. The wheels were still true. Everything appeared to be okay. So I'm ready to go again. The new blade I have is better suited to milling lumber than the one I had before. It has fewer teeth. It's also a bit wider and a bit thicker. And I'm hoping that'll work a lot better than the first one. I did make a couple of changes to the saw this time. I added a piece of plywood on the guard there. The last time when that blade popped off, that was pretty scary. And I didn't want to take the chance, in case it happened again, that the blade could whip up and, do some severe damage to me. I also moved the blade guides in a little bit closer, since I really don't plan on cutting stuff that wide anyway. And that supports the blade better, and it should help with the drifting problem I was having with the first one. My first cut is going to complete the cut that I stopped on the last time. I got, about that far in before I stopped, and then the blade came off. It was drifting down a little bit, and this should correct it. One thing I'm going to try to do this time is watch the blade to make sure it's not getting too dull. If it does get dull, I'll stop and I'll sharpen it. If it gets too gummed up, I'll stop and I'll clean it. I'm not going to try a water drip on this. It's just too messy, and it runs the risk of ruining the MDF wheels. I want to get a certain amount of cutting from this before I dismantle it for good. In the previous cutting videos, I got a lot of comments on how the saw is made. The saw itself doesn't move, it's stationary, and I push the wood through it. You got to remember that this entire build was meant to be done quickly and as strong as I possibly could in the least amount of work or time. And to make that saw itself roll on a track, I would have to spend a lot more time bracing that up to make it solid enough to resist that force of the blade cutting through the wood. That's a lot of force there, and it will make the saw chatter. Other comments were on how I'm raising the wood up. I'm using wood stacked up an inch at a time to cut the boards underneath the log to lift it up. Again, that was the easiest and the fastest way to do it. I don't have any other complex mechanisms like a motorcycle lift or something like that that I could put the log on to lift it up. Not to mention that something like that would have to be very, very rigid to resist that sideways force of the blade cutting through the wood. Lots of suggestions about hooking up some kind of a winch to pull the sled through the saw. It's actually really easy to lever it ahead with the stick that I'm using, and it maintains a really constant, steady, low speed feed rate, which is easy to control. And once again, it's about not complicating the build. This is the best way to do it easily and quickly. Another very common comment was to wedge up the piece as it's going through so it won't pinch the blade. Actually, there's not much pinching going on because of the way the blade cuts. The blade cuts a path wider than itself, so the leading edge is doing the cutting. The trailing edge is sitting in the cut. That's actually wider than the blade is thick, so there's no binding. If you watch the build videos, you'll know that I use ceramic tile as the blade guides for this, and I'm pleased to report that they're holding up great. It's amazing how well they're working. They are zero friction, zero trouble. There's no heat buildup. A couple of people wondered if the glue that I used to hold them onto the steel angle would melt because of the heat. Well, there's no heat, so that's not an issue. Another comment that I got several times was whether the blade was getting hot, whether I should have a water drip system to cool it down. But to the best of my knowledge, from my little experience doing this, the blade doesn't get hot at all. It stays cool. A water drip system would be more for lubrication and for keeping the blade clean. Okay, that was a big one. This is, oh man, pretty heavy. That's 16 inches wide, I do believe. 15, 16 down there, 16 up here. Quite a slab, and it's all solid sound wood too. There's none of the spalted, rotted areas in this one.